When George A. Romero, the father of the modern zombie movie, passed away, his secluded Pennsylvania home was sold quietly. It wasn't a mansion in Hollywood, but a large, rustic house nestled among tall trees, with dark wooden beams, stone fireplaces, and a basement filled with boxes of film reels, props, and scripts he never finished. The new owners were a young couple from Pittsburgh, Ellen and Marcus, who admired Romero's work but bought the property mostly for its privacy and price. At first, they joked about living in the zombie master's house, taking pictures in front of the gate and sending them to friends. But the joking didn't last. Almost immediately, small things unsettled them. Lights flickered in the basement even when the circuit breaker was off. Old film canisters were found on the living room table in the mornings, though they had left them stacked neatly in boxes. At night, the faint clicking of a film projector could be heard from Romero's old office, though no equipment had been left plugged in. Ellen described once walking into the basement and smelling cigarette smoke, thick, acrid, the way George had been known to chain smoke during his writing sessions. Yet the air was still, the windows sealed, no one else in the house. Things worsened in subtle, terrifying ways. Marcus would wake to the sound of shuffling footsteps in the hallway, dragging, uneven like the movements of zombies in Romero's films. But when he looked, the hallway was empty. Their dog refused to go down the basement stairs, growling at the darkness. One night Ellen awoke to the glow of moving images on their bedroom wall. It was grainy black and white footage. A hand clawing at a door, a figure staggering through a field. She screamed, but when Marcus turned on the lights, the images vanished, leaving the wall bare. In the attic, they discovered several unmarked VHS tapes in a box, each labeled only with dates. Curious, Marcus played one. Instead of a film, it showed what looked like surveillance footage of their house, but recent, not from Romero's lifetime. It captured them moving around the kitchen, sleeping in their bed, even watching TV the night before. They tore the attic apart, but found no cameras, no recording devices. The final straw came one night when Marcus came home late from work. Ellen had been in the living room, pale and trembling, insisting she had seen Romero himself. She said he appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair disheveled, glasses reflecting the light, face half hidden in shadow, watching her silently before dissolving into darkness. After that, they left the house and never returned. Neighbors later said the couple abandoned the property almost overnight, leaving dishes on the counter and clothes still hanging in closets. Realtors struggled to resell it. Every potential buyer complained of an oppressive atmosphere, of hearing faint projector clicks in the night, or of seeing shapes move in the corners of rooms. Even now, locals whisper that Romero never left his home, that in the quiet of Pennsylvania nights, you can still hear the dragging footsteps, the scratch of film reels spinning, and the low crackle of cigarette smoke that lingers in the halls. The house stood heavy among the trees, its windows catching only fragments of light through the branches, like half-closed eyes refusing to wake. Ellen had taken to keeping the curtains drawn, not because of the neighbors, there were none close enough to see in, but because of the strange reflections that sometimes appeared in the glass. Once, while rinsing dishes in the kitchen sink, she had glanced up at the window and seen not her own face but the blurred outline of a man standing just behind her shoulder, his head tilted as if studying her. When she spun around, the kitchen was empty, though the smell of tobacco lingered faintly in the air, clinging to the curtains like a memory that refused to wash out. Marcus dismissed it at first, saying it was the nerves of living in a place with so much history. But he too began to notice things he couldn't explain. When he returned late from work, he would find the old basement door ajar, though he had made a habit of locking it. Sometimes, in the darkened hall, he could swear he saw a shadow pulling back just as he entered, melting into the walls. The house seemed to breathe differently at night, each board and beam expanding with a sigh, each radiator hiss drawing his attention until he felt as though the house were listening to him, rather than the other way around. The basement became a silent battleground between them. Ellen refused to go near it anymore. She said that the walls down there had changed, that she saw stains across the stone, dark streaks that weren't there the day before, like old water damage except darker, thicker. Marcus checked once with a flashlight. The walls were rough and gray, lined with shelves where Romero had kept his archives, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yet when Marcus turned to leave, he felt the cold, unmistakable sensation of someone brushing past him. Not a breeze, but a body. His flashlight beam swung wildly across the shelves, catching on the blank metal tins of film, each one marked with uneven handwriting: day, night, final cut. The shadows seemed to deepen behind them, heavy and deliberate, until he climbed the stairs 2 at a time, shutting the door so hard the glass in the frame rattled. At night, the projector sounds grew bolder. At first, it was only a faint whir, the sort of sound you could blame on the heating system. But soon, it was unmistakable, the rhythmic clicking of a reel feeding through a machine. Sometimes the sound lasted only a few seconds before vanishing. Other times it went on long enough that Marcus and Ellen lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. They argued about going downstairs to check, but neither of them ever moved. The sound always ended on its own, replaced by a silence even heavier than before, as though the house were holding its breath after being caught in the act. It was Ellen who first saw the moving images. She described it to Marcus as though someone had draped a film reel over the air itself. On the far wall of their bedroom, in the moments before sleep, shapes began to flicker. A door opening, a field of long grass bending in slow waves, a pale figure staggering forward. She screamed, and the vision collapsed instantly into darkness. Marcus didn't believe her until one night, half asleep. He too saw a jittering image, an arm, thin and chalk-white, dragging across the wall as though trying to pull itself into their world. By now, they barely entered Romero's office. The room remained exactly as he had left it. A massive oak desk littered with notebooks, storyboards with scribbled notes, yellowed pages curling at the edges. The chair smelled of smoke and leather, and sometimes it creaked as though someone had just stood up from it. Ellen once swore she heard a voice there. Not clear words, but a low murmur like someone rehearsing dialogue. She said it made her skin crawl because it wasn't directed at her. It was as if the voice wasn't aware of her presence at all, as if she were intruding on a private moment that never ended. The house was no longer simply unsettling. It had become oppressive. Every hallway carried weight. Every closed door felt like it was holding back something waiting to be released. And though they tried to ignore it, to keep their lives normal, both Ellen and Marcus began to feel that the house didn't want them there, that they were trespassers in a place that belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't quite left. The atmosphere in the house shifted in ways that weren't always dramatic but always noticeable. It was in the temperature, for one. Some nights the upstairs hallway felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house, so cold that Ellen's breath fogged faintly as she walked toward the bedroom. In the mornings, the chill was gone, replaced with the damp, earthy warmth of an old home. But by then she would already have lain awake for hours, listening to every creak and whisper that stirred in the walls. The couple tried to maintain a routine, convincing themselves it was the strain of moving into a house with a name attached to it. They went about their evenings with the television on, lights glowing in every room. But small disruptions gnawed at that sense of normalcy. A glass left on the coffee table would be gone the next morning, only to reappear hours later in the sink. The kitchen chairs never sat the way they had been arranged the night before. Sometimes the house felt like it was subtly rearranging itself, undoing their presence, erasing their attempts at comfort. Marcus spent more time in Romero's office than Ellen could stand. She said the room held a residue, a heaviness that clung to the air like dust. Marcus, however, was drawn to it. He paged through the notebooks, some filled with lines of dialogue, others with fragmented ideas scrawled in quick handwriting, silence of a locked room, a door no one remembers building, footsteps with no source. Many of these scribbles felt less like film concepts and more like observations, hastily recorded impressions of things Romero himself might have noticed in the house. One page in particular unsettled Marcus. In thick, uneven ink, the words "they watch even when you don't see them" had been underlined 3 times. The pen pressed so hard that it left grooves in the paper. The basement grew louder at night. Not only the clicking of a projector now, but the faint static of audio, the distorted hum of voices. Marcus once thought he heard the beginning of a line, "They're coming," but it broke off in static, leaving only the hollow groan of the old pipes echoing in reply. Ellen refused to listen. She slept with pillows pressed around her head, as though muting the sounds could make them less real. One evening, after a particularly restless night, Ellen decided to confront the fear. She walked into the basement with Marcus behind her, flashlight beams cutting through the damp air. The walls seemed darker, streaked with something that shimmered faintly in the light. The smell of cigarette smoke was suffocating, stronger than ever. On the far wall, one of the film reels had unspooled, the strip of celluloid dangling across the floor like a trail of black ribbon. But what made Ellen stop breathing was the image frozen in one of the frames. She swore she saw herself standing in the very basement she was in, flashlight raised, face pale and wide-eyed. Marcus yanked her back upstairs, slamming the door shut, both of them shaken but unwilling to speak about it out loud. From then on, Ellen began to notice distortions not just on the walls but in her reflection. In the bathroom mirror, for brief flashes, her face looked older, her eyes hollow, her skin gray like the pallor of Romero's undead. It would only last a heartbeat before her reflection snapped back, but each time it left her trembling, gripping the sink so tightly her knuckles whitened. Marcus became more distant, restless, almost protective of the house itself. He told Ellen she was letting her imagination run wild, that Romero's legacy made her see things that weren't there. Yet she caught him one night, standing in Romero's office in the glow of a single desk lamp, murmuring as if in conversation with someone she could not see. His eyes were glazed, his hand resting on one of the notebooks. When she asked who he was talking to, he only blinked at her, as if coming back from somewhere far away, and said he couldn't remember. The silence between them grew heavier than the house itself. They no longer joked about living in the zombie master's home. They barely spoke of it at all, as though giving words to what was happening would solidify it, make it undeniable. Yet both of them knew the house was not simply a building with history, it was something alive, restless, and waiting. The weeks dragged on, and what had begun as subtle disturbances grew into an inescapable presence. The house no longer felt like a place where they lived, it felt like a set, a stage where something unseen rehearsed its scenes over and over, using them as unwilling extras. At night, Ellen often sat upright in bed, listening. She swore the house had a rhythm, like a pulse that rose and fell with the dark. When the lights were off and the silence pressed in, she could hear it, the creak of the floorboards not under their feet but somewhere else, moving through rooms they had locked. The faint drag of something heavy along the hallway runner, as if cloth or skin scraped against the fibers. The sharp metallic tick of film reels spinning just beyond the closed office door. Sometimes she felt the mattress dip beside her, the impression of weight lowering onto the bed, though Marcus was fast asleep. The house resisted light. Bulbs burned out far too quickly, plunging rooms into half-shadows even in the middle of the day. Candles flickered violently without draft, their flames guttering sideways as if something moved past them. The darkest place of all was the basement. No matter how powerful the flashlight, the beam seemed swallowed a few feet out, leaving the far corners black and impenetrable. Marcus tried once to set up a camping lantern down there, but the battery drained in less than an hour, leaving the lantern cold and lifeless, as though the darkness itself had fed on it. Ellen became increasingly sensitive to the mirrors. She began covering them with sheets, first in the bedroom, then the bathroom, then the old gilt-framed one in the hallway. Too often she caught glimpses of movement in them that didn't belong to her or Marcus. A hand withdrawing just as she looked, a figure standing in the corner where no one was, the subtle turn of a head as if watching her. One night she pulled the sheet from the bathroom mirror in a moment of defiance, and her own reflection stared back at her, but her mouth in the mirror was moving, forming words her own lips hadn't spoken. She screamed, slamming the sheet back across the glass, and refused to enter that bathroom alone again. Marcus, however, was changing. His fascination with Romero's notes had grown into an obsession. He began spending entire evenings in the office, scribbling in one of the unused notebooks, his handwriting frantic and uneven, as though trying to match the scrawl of Romero's. Ellen noticed that he sometimes left pages covered not with words but with crude sketches, figures with vacant eyes, doorways filled with shadow, outlines of film reels with jagged bursts of light. When she asked him what they meant, he brushed her off, claiming they were nothing but doodles. Yet his eyes had begun to carry a distant look, as if he were only half present when he spoke to her. One night, Ellen woke to find him standing at the foot of the bed, staring down at her in the dark. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. She asked him what he was doing, but he gave no answer, only turned and walked out of the room without a word, his footsteps slow and dragging across the hallway floor. The neighbors, few as they were, had noticed changes too. The couple living half a mile down the road mentioned to Ellen, in passing, that they had seen lights flickering at odd hours, sometimes projecting shapes onto the trees outside, like old black and white film clips playing across the forest. They asked if the couple had installed a projector. Ellen lied and said they were just testing equipment, but her hands shook as she spoke. The isolation grew heavier with every passing day. The house seemed to cut them off from the outside world. Phone calls dropped for no reason, radios produced nothing but static, and their internet slowed to a crawl. It was as if the house wanted their focus undivided, as if it was tightening a noose of silence and darkness around them. And beneath it all, Ellen began to sense a pattern, not random hauntings, not scattered fragments, but something deliberate. The projector sounds, the shadows, the images on the walls, Marcus's obsession. It was as though the house was piecing together a film of its own, using them as its unwilling cast, building toward a scene neither of them wanted to see. By the final month, Ellen felt as if the house had turned Marcus into someone else. He no longer joked with her, no longer sat at the dinner table, no longer seemed to notice her at all. Every evening he disappeared into Romero's office, where the glow of a single desk lamp spilled under the crack of the door. Sometimes she heard him whispering low, hurried conversations with no pauses, as if he were responding to a voice only he could hear. When she pressed her ear to the door, she caught fragments, scene complete, not yet finished. They need more. One night she forced the door open. Marcus sat hunched over Romero's desk, surrounded by reels of film, his face pale in the lamplight. The air smelled of burnt cigarettes, though no smoke curled in the room. His eyes were bloodshot, his fingers blackened with ink, clutching a pencil that trembled as he wrote. He looked up at her slowly, as if pulling himself from a dream, and his lips formed the words, "He's directing me now." Ellen slammed the notebook shut, dragging him to his feet, but when she glanced at the pages, she saw her own name scrawled again and again in jagged handwriting, surrounded by sketches of dark hallways and blank-eyed figures. From then on, she was afraid of Marcus almost as much as the house. The final night began like any other, shadows stretching too long across the walls, the electricity flickering as though the house itself were exhaling. Ellen tried to sleep, but the sound of the projector started again, louder than before. This time it wasn't confined to the basement. The clicking filled the entire house, echoing through the vents, rattling the glass in the windows. She shook Marcus awake, but he only stared at her, unblinking, before rising silently and walking out of the bedroom. She followed him down the hall. The air was heavy, the smell of smoke suffocating. The office door was wide open, and inside the desk lamp burned so bright it cast warped shadows across the walls. On those walls, images flickered, grainy black and white scenes projected onto the plaster. Ellen saw herself in the projection, standing exactly where she stood now, her mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with glasses, his features obscured by light and smoke. She spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. But when she turned back, Marcus had stepped into the projection itself. His body merged with the flickering images, his movements jerky, unnatural, as though the film reel had swallowed him. The clicking grew faster, the reel spinning so violently that it screamed against the machine, and the light burst across the room in a strobe of fragments, faces, hands, staggering shapes, eyes rolling back in sockets. Ellen screamed his name and lunged forward, but the desk lamp shattered with a violent crack, plunging the room into darkness. The projector noise stopped instantly, leaving only silence, so absolute it rang in her ears. When she found the courage to light her phone, Marcus was gone. The office was empty, save for the reels scattered on the floor. Their film strips stretched and tangled like veins. She searched the house until dawn, but he never returned. The next morning, Ellen fled. She left with nothing but a single bag, abandoning the house as it stood, dishes still in the sink, clothes still in drawers. Neighbors said she drove away pale and trembling, refusing to stop or explain. The house sat vacant for months. Realtors attempted to resell it, but potential buyers never lasted more than a single viewing. Some claimed they heard footsteps following them from room to room. Others said they smelled smoke in the walls. A few insisted that they saw flickering shapes on the plaster, grainy shadows that played across the rooms, like fragments of a film that had never been finished. As for Marcus, he was never found. Police searched the property, combed the woods, dragged the nearby creek, but there was no trace of him. All that remained were the notebooks in Romero's office, filled with frantic handwriting that grew less and less legible until the words dissolved into jagged scratches. Locals whisper that George A. Romero never left his house, that in the deep of night, when the trees lean in and the air smells faintly of smoke, the projector starts up again, clicking steadily through the dark. And if you stand close enough, you might see the latest reel. Not of zombies staggering through cornfields, but of the living who dared to move into his house, faces caught forever in flickering black and white, trapped in a film that only the house itself will ever finish. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.